My first question, who are you people?
Oh, why do you start with the hardest question first?
It's the basic.
Do you want an existential response or?
Who are
Okay,
you
I'm
people?
Kat Gordon, otherwise known as Pinky.
Oh, I'm Talia, otherwise known as Brain. And I would love to see this anthology skyrocket and be all over the place.
Yeah, for me, because it's so own voice, my absolute dream would be to see it taught in a curriculum, in a disability studies course or something like that, because I think you actually could unpack so much in the stories.
I think so. So tell me a little bit about your backgrounds. Are you authors?
I'm an author. I arrange the alphabet on a regular basis. I am the author of a very silly space opera with adventures, romance, and cake. My first book is Life in the Cosm, which was also published by Renaissance. And my second book, The Stealth Lovers, is coming out this year, also published by Renaissance, because Renaissance is where it's at. During the day, I am a stylistic editor, primarily for independent authors. And this is my very first anthology project where I'm on this end of the anthology, not submitting, but being a co-editor. So it's been a really interesting challenge. And I have a lot of respect for editors of anthologies now. It's a real process. There's a lot of work that goes into it. So I do respect the craft of it. I respect the craft of it. It is not something that is easily done. It's a labor of love though, so I wouldn't erase it. But from now on, when I hear of editors of anthologies, I'm going to say that person is working hard, because I recognize that now.
Talk to me a little bit about the Spoonie Authors Network.
Okay, so the Spoonie Authors Network was something I started in 2016 after I attended my very first writers conference at CanCon. I recognized right away that there were a lot of people with, for lack of a better term, visible disabilities, people a lot with rollators and canes and such, and I am a disabled author. So I thought, well, these are only the disabilities that I could perceive. What about the ones that I can't, the invisible disabilities? And I have a feeling there's a lot of people out there who are under the disability umbrella. And I thought, I'm going to just start to see if I can network with other authors who identify as disabled, neurodiverse, a Spoonie and such. And I created a multi-author blog called the Spoonie Authors Network. And I thought really it was only going to be myself and one friend. And it turned out that we have 20 contributors now. And I've learned so much about the spectrum of disability and chronic conditions. And I really believe in representing the diversity within disability and chronic conditions. And from the Spoonie Authors Network, which is spoonieauthorsnetwork.com, I felt inspired in a good way to see if we can gather authors together for an anthology, but I didn't know how to put it together at the time. So that's where you came in, Nat. You saved me. And then you suggested to bring Talia on board, and I was like, what could possibly go wrong? But Talia and I are best friends, by the way. I mean, obviously, you could see that we have a certain brand of humor. And it's been so great to work with my BFF. We've bounced ideas off each other. We've had endless laughs. That's part of our coping mechanism when work is extra worky. I just couldn't be happier with the team we have, like the three of us working together. And I know that once we hand the manuscript off to the Renaissance copy editors, it's going to be in great hands. And so, yeah, it started with the Spoonie Authors Network, and now we're with Nothing Without Us. And I'm just so thrilled that it's turned out this way.
Talia, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background?
Oh, where to begin? I was born, that happened. That's important. What do I do? It's like every time I do this, I actually have to go back and look at my list because I almost always forget something. I am a Jewish ritual and service leader. I'm a writer, poet, sensitivity editor, public speaker, workshop facilitator, educator, mentor, coach, activist. And that's just what I do in my spare time. And I'm a woman who is in no particular order an out, queer, autistic, lesbian, trans woman. I'm involved with Heart Spark Press, another amazing press that focuses on raising the voices of trans women, non-binary, assigned male at birth folk, and particularly the voices of people of color in those various categories. And I also manage disability. I'm involved in a few Jewish communities, an autistic advocacy political group, and I'm working towards getting a graduate degree and being ordained this summer as a Kohenet Hebrew priestess.
You're also trying to take over the
because
world.
I don't do enough. Yes. But that's a nighttime activity.
That's right. That's what we do every night.
Yeah.
And what made you decide to co-edit this project?
I was asked, and I don't know how to say no. No, seriously though, I thought it was a really, really neat project, and I'm really enjoying it.
Amazing. All right, tell me why you decided to go with the title Nothing Without Us.
So I was having a conversation with Derek Newman Still, who we've invited to do the foreword for the project. And we were just having a Facebook chat, and it was like during the Facebook chat, we were talking about the Nothing About Us Without Us anthem that's often used in many circles. I'm not sure if it started with the deaf community and such, but it's been used in many marginalized circles. And I just said, I wish we could just call this anthology Nothing Without Us. It was that, it just spilled out. And after that, I thought, yeah, nothing in this anthology will actually be done without people who identify as disabled, deaf, neurodiverse, Spoonie, or who manage mental illness. Everybody from the authors to the editors to the publisher, and I'm sure like it's almost all of us. And I thought, well, how cool is that? It's a statement, I feel too, that represents the own voice thing. Like, you're not going to represent us. We are going to represent ourselves. So there's nothing that's done here without us.
Can you tell me a little bit more about Own Voices?
So own voice is a term that I've only recently, I would say maybe within the last 2 years, have come to know. I first learned about it from queer authors, wanting to write their own stories, wanting to, being fed up with just the tropes out there, particularly like the bury or gay tropes and those kinds of things that are harmful tropes. And so I learned about own voices from queer authors. We're going to write our stories. We're going to show you what our lives are like. And it's how you represent us. And then I noticed that it went into other circles. It went into circles of ethnicity, like Indigenous own voices. And then I saw it went into disabled, deaf cultures too. And I thought, okay, this is a thing. And although you can write not in your own lane, as they say, there is something very rich about reading a story that is written from the perspective of the main character is represented by an author who shares the same life, kind of the same lived experience. And it's funny, but I was watching Black Panther on the weekend again. And it's probably one of my favorite films in that superhero universe because, the costume designer went into customs of different African tribes of the past and present and such. The director, everybody, and it felt like nothing like any other film that I had seen in that category. And I said to my husband, this is so own voice. There's just something about it that's extra special, that feels like a full meal when you partake in it. And so, so own voices for me is the author is truly representing the identity that you see on the page or on screen.
Own voices is so important. So often the stories that are told that aren't own voices are the inspiration porny type, where the disabled person, the marginalized person is there to uplift the usually straight white dude, and I don't even want to remember the name of that film recently at the Oscars, which is a prime example of this inspiration porn. It's just brutal. And, unfortunately, we did get some submissions that fell into that category. And I'm willing to say I wanted to throw them into a burn with fire pile. I don't mince words around this stuff. This is part of my activist work. STFU. And we're seeing this in the politics in the province of Ontario right now about the discussions over autism funding, where the voices of actually autistic people are being silenced in favor of people who don't actually listen to the needs of their own children and adults who are autistic. So nothing about us without us, nothing without us. Pardon me while I go grab my clue by 4.
So, if I'm gathering from what you're saying, representation of disability in fiction right now is not so great?
I think
that's a polite way of putting it.
For me, I think I was on a panel a few years ago, and this question has come back to me ever since. Do you know any books that have main characters who are disabled and such? And I knew one. And I thought, this is not good. Here I am trying to do the Spoonie Author Network and stuff. I don't actually know a lot of authors. And so whenever I have seen things, it's been normally on TV or film, and it's just been so like, no. And I think what I'm enjoying about this process is now I have a list of authors that I could follow and share with other people. Okay, you want to know the authors that are out there and the stuff they're writing? Okay, here you go. And I like to be able to answer that question because the other day, I don't know if is it The Good Doctor? Is that what that show is called?
With the doctor who's autistic?
Autistic?
Yeah.
I've never watched the show. I just saw a commercial. And I actually screamed at the TV after I saw the commercial. I thought, that doesn't feel right to me. So I don't know, again, I'm ignorant of the show, but the way they had that actor speak and such, and that, I thought, this feels like it's being written by someone who's not autistic. But correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what it felt like. I know there are autistic people who are very upset about, I think it's Atypical is the show? Talia,
yeah,
you know? And that. So I think there's a lot of writing out there that is not actually done by people in their own lane. And like I said, you can do it, but get beta readers or sensitivity editors who are in that lane. Because I can't. There's not an overwhelming list that I can say. Of course, I can once Nothing Without Us is out. I can say, look, here. But for me, I just didn't find it.
And a lot of authors, etc., or not authors, editors, don't want to hear own voices. They turn people down. There was a Twitter thread a month or 3 ago about own voice autistic author getting turned away by an editor because their character didn't look like the characters on Atypical or The Good Doctor, because not really autistic enough.
Yeah.
When I wrote a short fiction for a flash fiction contest and included a own voice character, autistic and gender diverse, and was told that the character needed to get over themselves in the feedback from one of the judges, or two of the judges. And it was like, fuck this, I'm not keeping on with that contest. And it is not a safe contest for own voice writers. That's the message I got, because when I brought it up, I was shut down. Yeah. When I raised my concerns about the judging process. And if that's what's happening in contests, the same thing is happening when editors receive stories, novels, etc.
Yeah, that's such a good point, because when I was writing Life in the Cosm and sending it out for comments in the beta reading phase, I have a character named Nuala who has a neuropathic disability. And she has some good days and some bad days and such. And one of the comments from beta reader was, well, why is she walking well today? And at that time, that was my lived experience, that sometimes I had really good days where I can do a lot, and then other times I didn't. And so throughout Life in the Cosm, sometimes she needs her little mobility roller skates to get places. Sometimes she falls and suffers, and sometimes she's climbing a cliff. Like, that was my experience. I guess I didn't make her tragic enough consistently or something.
You know, we published a book at Parasomnia, actually, where there's a character with a chronic condition who has, there's a scene where they're building forts outside, and then later that day, I think she takes a shower and she's barely able to stand. And I think one of the critiques we got on Goodreads was like, well, that didn't make sense. How is the character able to do one thing and then the next moment not able to do another thing? And I was like, boy, you've never had chronic pain or fatigue, have you?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's so true. And that reflects the shit that disabled folk encounter every day out in the world. You know, how often are there memes that get, or photos taken of disabled folk who stand up and get out of their mobility chair or scooter to get something off a grocery shelf? This assumption that if somebody's using a mobility device, that they need it all the freaking time.
Yeah. And one thing about NWU is I wanted so desperately to get different kinds of disabilities, states, or conditions. And in one of our stories, the protagonist has severe chemical sensitivity. And that is a debilitating thing. You know, I didn't want 20 stories of someone using a wheelchair. And I was so thrilled to get that story, because I thought, yeah, people don't think about that. Accessibility in public spaces also extends to scents and chemicals and this and that and the other thing, right? So I was just so excited to have that in our anthology as well. Yeah,
that was actually something that you sought, right? A diversity in the call for submissions.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more about why?
About why?
Yeah.
When I was doing the Spoonie Authors Network, if he's watching this video, he knows who he is. But there was one author who suffered from debilitating migraines, and he felt that he wasn't qualified to be a part of the Spoonie Authors Network. And so I had a feeling it was, and we unpacked his story, and he started off with, well, sometimes I go blind. And I thought, I don't go blind. And so he was explaining what happens when he goes to these migraines. And he was also explaining that he has to do things every single day to avoid getting into those states where it could even be seizures and stuff like that. So I said, so you're chronically managing something. You're doing it all the time, and it just like a light bulb went on, right? And so I don't know how many others after that I had met who thought they weren't spoony enough because they didn't fall into like the things that we typically can see, someone using a mobility device or whatnot. And I just refuse to be a gatekeeper of you're not disabled enough. I find myself almost being an evangelist, saying you are disabled enough, take your place with us, we welcome you. And I am someone who particularly loathes gatekeeping in marginalized spaces. And so, yeah, it was really important to me. And I was so hoping that we would get kind of diversity, and we did. And I was really, I keep saying I was really thrilled, but I really was thrilled about all this.
Sorry, I had another question and now it's poofed off my mind.
Yay for FibroFog! Woo!
You see your destiny and the knowledge vaporizes.
It does. It really does.
Okay, but can I share a funny anecdote about FibroFog?
Yes.
Questions. So you don't know this, Nate. So I'm telling you this for the first time. But Talia and I also suffer from FibroFog, and we had plans on how we wanted to map out how this anthology went out. And one of them was to come up with a schedule. Like, we had that plan. And then you wrote us and said, oh, did you send me your proposed schedule, blah, blah, blah? And I wrote you, oh, I'll get that to you. Then I wrote to Talia, we didn't do the schedule. We got to do the schedule. Let's do it. And we just put it together so fast. And then I was like, okay, here's the schedule.
Well, we'd talked about it, and we'd mapped it out, but we hadn't actually formally put a schedule in one place. It was all in messages or notes, as opposed to
I mean,
really
I
safe place.
Times I say to Brain, did I do that in real life or just in my mind? Right?
I do that a lot too. I've remembered my question.
Hey.
Why is it important to see a variety of people in fiction? Why is it important to have representation of certain groups in fiction?
Well, I think it makes I go again to the word rich. I think it makes it rich and interesting. I love to garden. I don't actually have only one flower in every flower bed of my garden. I find it looks much nicer when you have a whole bunch of flowers. And I think when it comes to people, you learn things. Like I'm a disabled person, but I don't have all the disabilities. So I'm not going to know everything. So when I get stories written by people who have a different experience than me, I learn things, and I find that so enriching. And then when you start going into intersectionality with ethnic backgrounds and race and gender identity, sexual identity, when you intersect those things also with disability and such, wow, like you really experience something else as well. And I never wanted to put an anthology together where I knew all the things. I wanted to learn as well from other people. And there were some stories where I would be like, I don't know how this is going to end, because I really wasn't in their lane. So I didn't know. And then when they ended the story a certain way, I was like, this is fantastic. So yeah, I didn't want to be bored out of my skull. I think I typically like to work on things that I would enjoy to read myself. So I don't think I'd want to subject other readers to, here's the same exact story 20 times over. What is the point of that, really?
So there have actually been a few anthologies made by disabled authors, but those tend to focus on the disability. They're usually fiction stories that represent, what it's like to live with a disability, or a lot of the times they're essays. You chose to go for an angle where the disability was present, but not the subject of the story. And you chose to go for short fiction stories as well instead of essays. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
I could tell you stuff, but Brain hasn't talked in a while. You want to say something, Brain?
Yeah.
Yeah, so can you tell which one of us is more extroverted than the other? This happens to us regularly. We crack up, which is humor is part of how we manage. And again, centering the disability over the story is a type of inspiration porn. Oh, look at them, so successful despite their disability. Oh, look, aren't they so good because they have this disability and they manage so well and look so normal? We're going to give them a little pat on the head, and then they can go wander off and do their own thing again. And we don't have to look except when we want to bring them out for our fundraising and our photo ops. A nice little autistic person. Now go home. So the short fiction, and so the stories, I'm really excited about all of the stories in it, because the disability, while present, doesn't take over and isn't the only aspect of the characters. And it allows for a humor. Some of the stories, the humor is just so amazing. That I was laughing out loud at reading some of these while going through them. And often we're expected to do these essays, talk about, and be the educators, whereas this allows for more creativity, having some fun with it, and really turning things on its ear when it comes to expectations around disability and what we're supposed to be when we're managing disability. And we're not all the good disabled person, the acceptable disabled person. I don't play that game.
Brain is bang on there. I think also too that the problem with nonfiction essay, well, I shouldn't say the problem. They're actually very important and they have their place. But for Nothing Without Us, I wanted to have protagonists, not side characters, main characters. And I wanted the authors to take those main characters however way they wanted to take them. If they wanted to make them wizards, if they wanted to make them sci-fi pilots, if they wanted to make them ghosts or whatnot. And so by doing that and allowing for a variety, I found it was really just letting the authors be who they wanted to be as they were writing through these characters. And what happened with Nothing Without Us was a little bit of a surprise to me, because we had fiction, like genre fiction, but then we had literary or realistic fiction. And there's always been a bit of a battle between those two things, I don't know why. And again, I hate gatekeeping stuff. Like, it's just not. Ugh. So I actually found the stories that moved me were a combination of the realistic and the fantastical. And I thought, why can't they both exist together? They're great stories. They're written well. And I think the way we've put them together, there is a nice flow between the fantastical and the realistic. So that was really important to me. And fiction as opposed to essays, because take me on a ride, take me on a story. Like I said, essays are super important and they do have their place. But I felt that there might be a danger, especially when it's not an own voice, of making these horrible inspiration porn stories. And the other thing too, I wanted fiction because we're really represented poorly in fiction. Again, I like superhero stories basically, but I mean, you did a panel with Dominic Bercier about how really badly mental illness and just neurodiversity is done in like these DC comics or Marvel comics and whatnot.
Everywhere.
And I thought if anyone wanted to kind of just write fiction stories for Nothing Without Us, I knew we weren't going to get those horrible tropes if we selected own voices, because we really are lacking. We're lacking in positive representation in fiction.
Yeah, and you know, it's huge. A few weeks ago, there was this alien invasion movie on Amazon Prime or wherever it was, one of the streaming services, and I thought, okay, one of my escapes is every so often I like to watch these movies where you just put the brain aside. Sometimes I'll make snarky comments through it. It can be a lot of fun. But it very quickly turned out into like an disabled people save the world in spite of their disability or whatever. I got through maybe 20 minutes of it and I had to turn it off. It was absolutely horrendous. And it's like you, and that's so common with disability portrayal, and this idea that that it's about curing the person.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, and this is particularly true for neurodiversity, mental illness, etc. And not enough of it looks at the social aspects and what is referred to as the social model of disability, where a lot of the issues around disability are not the physical or the mental health or whatever it is, but how society responds. We're always the ones who are supposed to adapt to mainstream society, not the other way around.
Yeah.
So actually, this leads perfectly into my next question, which is, why is it important to specifically support projects that uplift the voices of disabled people?
I think one of the reasons is that so many of us are living well below poverty line, and the paying work always goes to not own voices who portray us poorly.
Wow.
Yeah.
No, that's a really.
I'm naming it.
Yeah.
And we're often expected to educate and do stuff for free in ways that don't actually help uplift.
That is so true. That is so true. And I think if we do, support and buy works from disabled people, then their perspectives are going to come more strongly into the publishing world, so that maybe, just maybe, other publishers will realize that they need to take these voices more seriously and not try to edit them down according to their own perspective as opposed from the author's perspective. And I think that even though I say things like the stories are quote, by us, for us, as that expression goes, I think everybody could benefit from reading the stories in Nothing Without Us. They're good stories. They're just really well written. Yeah, it's like, support us. We write good. We do words good.
So how did the selection process go? Did you get a lot of submissions?
Oh my gosh. We got a lot. I don't remember how many we got, but lots.
Yeah, there were quite a lot. And mostly we were on the same page for everything we accepted and rejected.
Yeah.
And there were there were a few stories where we read them and they didn't fit. And it was, and a couple of times feedback to the author, this is great. It would make an excellent novel.
Yes.
So that was the type of feedback we tried to be with, and we had a number that were just so good, but just limitations of space, flow, all of these things that go into planning an anthology, or if it were a magazine of short fiction, to have it a cohesive unit as well, which, and it's always sucks to have to say no. I will say that we did get, as I mentioned earlier, we did get stories that were inspiration porn, or the disabled person existed to save the non-person's life, etc. Those, no problem.
I kind of love how you put it.
Yeah, let's erase that. Yeah. So I had no problem with kicking those to the curb. But so many of them that we got, it was like, oh, these are fabulous. We want to see them out there at some point in some form.
Amazing. And you have quite the selection, I understand. Your authors are mostly from Canada?
Yeah, now this was the interesting part. We got stories from around the world, but we only selected the ones that we did select because of the way the stories were. So we actually didn't go, we didn't actually omit people from other countries. It's just these were the stories that spoke the loudest to us, right? So now I think it's just, it's mostly Canadians and some people from the US as well. But yeah, the final bit of the selection, oh man, like it physically hurt me to say no to some of them, but I realized you can't have a 200,000 word apology. But there were a few ones, like Talia said, that we were like, this has to be a book, and then we're gonna buy it when it becomes a book. So many great stories out there. But yeah, we have a lot of because of Renaissance's being a Canadian company trying to promote Canadian diverse voices. We followed the mandate to try to get as many Canadians in there. But it's not like we just sort of, oh, they're Canadian, they're in. They had to grab us, and I found the stories that we selected were stories that haunted me for days after. Like I didn't just read them and go, oh, that's okay. I would think about them 2 or 3 days later. So that was really good. But as Talia also said, there were some stories that had to be jettisoned into outer space. It's just, oh, no, sorry, no.
And you did reject quite a few Canadians as well.
Yeah, and there was a mix. There were great Canadian ones. There were great Canadians ones that we were sad to not be able to include, and we did have a few that were the jettison ones. I don't think that those were geographically specific. It seemed to be uniform, I think.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Yeah. We really didn't pick based on country. We really didn't. It really was how the stories impacted us. And also, again, keeping in mind about the diversity of the stories as well.
Yeah.
And why did you choose Renaissance as a publisher for this?
Because I love you so much. You know, I'll tell you the truth. Talia and I had I'll tell you the truth as opposed to lying profusely. but yesterday, Talia and I had our Nothing Without Us kind of afternoon meeting. And what I said to her was, if we had to do this with any other publisher, I bet we would be just batting heads constantly along the way. And I knew that with Renaissance, because Renaissance is so open to diversity, that it would be a welcoming place for this anthology, and that you would nurture us and help us along, because this is the first time for both of us that we're co-editing an anthology. So we were really glad to have that support. But the main reason is that we knew that it would be a safe space and a welcoming space for us and the authors as well, and that we wouldn't be edited for content in that way that some authors have been. Oh, they're not disabled enough, or that's not the way I saw a disabled person on TV, and that kind of thing, right?
Yeah, for sure. And also knowing that issues of characters' pronouns in stories wouldn't be a problem. There are gender diverse characters in a number of the stories that use a variety of pronouns, and some editors, some publishers have cranial rectal inversion and just don't want to deal with it and insist on no singular they, has to be he or she, and just not willing to do it. And, in one of the stories, if I'm remembering it correctly, there was a character that had something that indicated their current pronouns, which is fabulous.
So this anthology is diverse not only in the representation of the disabilities, but also, intersectionally.
Yes, very much so.
Oh.
Well, I was really, really thrilled to see diversity and gender identity of authors and stories. That was great. I'm someone who just loves diversity. So if you could just make things as, inclusive as possible, I'm just happy as a lamb. We have stories with Indigenous content. We have a really cool story that takes place in Africa that I just want to say so much about because it's so cool. But and there's another story that takes place in Hawaii, and I kind of love the ritual of the belief in the goddess interwoven with how the main character navigates through the story. We have another story that is on a pagan plane, pagan tradition. Really interesting the way that worked out too. So we have we also have on a financial level, there's one story that shows what it's like to be disabled without a lot of money, and how you navigate through those circles as well. So I love that. We have religious diversity. We have
you have a story that tackles homelessness as well.
That's right. That was the one I was particularly thinking about. Exactly. Yeah. So again, like when we put the final selection together and kind of organize them, I just sat with the ebook version and went through it, and I thought, oh my gosh, this is so literary. Like they've turned out to be such a great collection altogether, and I think it is because there's so many different types of diversity and intersectionality in it. And if we could have made it 200,000 words, there would have been even more.
You pay for it. All right. Well, if you have any closing thoughts.
We have to think now?
You weren't thinking the whole time?
I just want to thank everybody who submitted to us. Because there is that feeling that when you do a call for submissions, you're like, is anybody going to answer the call? And it was so great to get, to get so many people writing into us, and triple thanks to the authors that of the stories that we selected, and a kabillion thanks for Talia as my co-editor, because I couldn't have done this without her, and a zillion thanks for you, Nathan, for supporting us every step of the way. And I run out of illions, so I think I've covered that.
Yeah, what she said.
All right, the anthology is currently running its Kickstarter. If you want to please contribute and help make it a reality. I'm going to put the link down below. And I want to thank everybody for listening and watching and hopefully reading the anthology. And thanks Talia and Kat for chatting with me.
Thank you, Nat.
And any complaints can be addressed to Doug Ford, current Premier of Ontario.